Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Martin Tengler. Martin, as most of you will know, is the head of hydrogen research at Bloomberg New Energy Finance and has been tracking the hydrogen industry for multiple years and has been in Bloomberg, I think, for nearly 8 years now. So welcome, Martin. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you, Nadim.
Thanks. So you're going to be one of the many expert speakers at World Electrolysis Congress, which is happening in March 4th to the 7th in Dusseldorf, and I think our third annual event on the electrolysis part. But I thought it'd be interesting maybe just to unpick your thoughts as we sit and record this in January 2024 about the entirety of I guess, where we are in the maturation of the clean hydrogen sector. Certainly, we've seen a frantic, I guess, couple of years with a lot of legislation laid down, hopefully legislation which is going to provide sort of the foundational underpinnings for some infrastructure to be built. But yeah, I'd be interested to have your take both on what you see happening across Europe and equally across the US and some of the other major markets.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've definitely saw a lot of really important legislation being passed in many parts of the world. Very importantly, we track the subsidies, the money that's available for hydrogen around the world. And that's been growing quite impressively. So by now, we track some $350 billion that have been committed by governments around the world towards green and blue and clean hydrogen. Now, we split this number in several ways because we track it subsidy by subsidy. So you can literally come and download the entire subsidy list and we just compile it and make charts from that. And there's a couple interesting insights for us from there. Number one is this really two markets where most of the subsidies are being handed out. And that's one, the US. If you assume that all the projects that have been announced are getting the 45V or 45Q credits that have been announced, then you've got Europe, and there you've got European Union, and on top of that, you can stack all the individual member states of the EU. The US is, in theory, giving more money than the EU at this moment to combine with member states, but it's not a massive difference. So really, these are the two leading markets. And if you look at a different way to slice the data on how much money is being given out is looking at, okay, so is this money being given to the producers of the hydrogen, or is it being given to the suppliers, to the users of the hydrogen, or to the midstream? Who's going to be getting it once it's handed out? It hasn't been handed out yet, most of it, but once it is. Of course, the US, it's a production tax credit, so it's the producer that's getting the money. In the US, in the EU, and many European countries, we also have, of course, lots of support on the supply side for the producers. Now, Europe has some support for demand. The US is planning $1 billion for demand out of more than 100 billion. So it's just to give you the scale.
Yeah.
Europe has more demand side support, but overall, most of the money would be going to the producer. And that would have been fine if you go back 20 years ago to Europe, again, trying to scale up the renewable energy industry. And you were giving money, or Europe was giving money to the producers because those were developers of renewable electricity, and there was demand for electricity by default. You could just plug into the grid. Of course, that's becoming harder and harder these days. But back then, maybe in 2000, 2004, it was not so hard to get connected as it is today. You connect to the grid, and by default, you have in Germany, 80 million users of electricity. Or it's much harder to find a grid like this for
Mhm.
hydrogen. So if we're
Mhm.
going to see the hydrogen market scale up, and in turn, of course, the electrolyzer market in tandem with it, because this is a conference on electrolyzers, we would need to see more on the demand side in our view. And there's other ways in which you could support demand side. And we're seeing that in Europe as well, as Europe is clearly leading here with things like mandates. So of
Mhm.
course we've got quotas for renewable fuels of non-biological origin, and we've got industry, we've got transport, aviation, shipping. So all of that's going to add up, but those quotas aren't happening right now.
Mhm.
And the other thing you can do is a carbon price. And the carbon price today exempts most of the sectors that we expect in the future should be or could be large users of hydrogen or clean hydrogen,
Yeah.
like existing users, ammonia producers, oil refiners, chemicals. and also others that could use it don't use it today, like steel. And that's going to change for most of these sectors as the CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism, gets phased phased in, and
Mhm.
those free allowances that are being received by these sectors get phased out. But again, that isn't going to make a material difference until about 2030, based on our analysis.
Yeah.
So then it's not a surprise that you have a lot of projects that have been announced today, but they're not going ahead because they don't have somebody who's either got the money from a subsidy or the been forced by some kind of a legislation, be it an economic one like carbon price, or be it a mandate today to start buying hydrogen. And
Mhm.
that's going to start happening later as
Yeah.
because of all of that legislation, but that's going to be slow and going to take another couple of years before we get there. So that's one of the reasons why we've seen this gap between supply and demand in Europe and most of the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite clear. And in terms of, I guess, shoring up demand, you mentioned a number of sort of specific niche markets, I guess, and those niche markets, I assume, are only going to begin to grow. I mean, what are your thoughts around that demand number? I know a lot of analysts around the world obviously have big picture numbers for 2050. But maybe dialing it back to sort of shorter term 2030s, 2035s, and thinking about how steep is that ramp going to be in terms of getting projects to FID? What are your thoughts around that current angle of the projected growth in hydrogen?
So looking specifically at electrolyzers,
Mm.
we've seen the market double, or the market, the shipments of electrolyzers doubled in 2021, double again in 2022, double or almost double in 2023. We're just
Yeah.
tallying up the final numbers there. For the first time, definitely crossing 1 gigawatt in
Mhm.
2023 per year
Yeah.
of shipments, which is great. And the one thing, though, that I can say is that we have consistently been too optimistic in our forecasts for the electrolyzer market, and most of the time we were we our conservative scenario was a bit too optimistic. So we're currently actually thinking about exactly the question that you have: is how much can we realistically expect to see, given the existing legislation, given the uncertainties that we see in the market. I would say it's safe to say we're going to see growth. So again, we saw a gigawatt in 2023. We're probably going to see 2 gigawatts in 2024. We might see more than that.
Mhm.
And we might see another doubling in 2025. So as we get closer to that go to the years when the carbon price finally starts kicking in
Yeah.
with the allowances being phased out, and when these quotas start getting closer and closer and closer that you need to actually meet them, that's when we're going to see a lot more projects being built. And I think we're now starting to see a slow ramp up towards that, which is, you could call it exponential growth, but it started from a very low base. So it's going to take some time before we start seeing that number grow very fast. But that being said, there has been a lot of investment. We just released our investment tracker for hydrogen,
Uh-huh.
and for the entire clean energy transition or energy transition. And the hydrogen saw about $10 billion of investment in 2023, which only includes the things that actually are hydrogen. And if you add to it the things like steel, ammonia, and CCS, which we actually count separately,
Yeah.
cars, which we count separately, we're at over $30 billion. So that's maybe tripling on the year before that. So investment is also growing very, very quickly. And that investment isn't going to translate into projects tomorrow. It's going to translate
Mhm.
into projects maybe a year, 2 years later, depending on how long they take to get built. So clearly there's some more speeding up happening in terms of investment, which is faster perhaps than what we've seen in terms of deployment. So that kind of implies there's going to be faster growth in future than what we've seen in the past.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, thanks a lot, Martin, for sharing that insight. It's definitely sounds good. Definitely as expected. I think it's going to be fascinating just to track for the next couple of years and see indeed if we're able to keep doubling the the gigawatts of electrolyzers to be delivered and certainly start to try and match an exponential growth. There's certainly some big scary targets out there, and time is pressing. And 2030 is simply just around the corner in terms of building energy infrastructure. So, as I said, Martin, great to have you at the World Electrolyzer Congress, and we look forward to hearing more from you and your colleagues, and as you analyze and provide us all the data and knowledge that we need to make our decisions. So, thanks a lot, Martin.
Thanks, Nadim.
Cheers. Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too.